Hey everyone, I'm Nicholas Wu, a political reporter here at USA Today. I'm here with Hannah Gaber, a video producer, to discuss what happened today in impeachment. So this morning and afternoon, we saw former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, talk in front of the House Intelligence Committee as part of the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump. And I'm just going to remind everyone, you can ask us anything about impeachment and today's events in the comments. Hannah?
All right. So, I mean, why don't we kind of start with first things first? It seemed like some unusual things happened in the hearing today. Right off the top, there was kind of a dust-up between Chairman Schiff and some of the members, including Jordan and Stefanik. Was that as unusual as it seemed, or is that sort of par for the course? Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, sure. So some of the verbal tussles that we saw there are pretty standard for politics. There's a lot of partisanship, and members have disagreements about how to conduct proceedings. What was unusual, though, was that Jordan and Stefanik technically spoke out of turn. So although they raised concerns that many Republicans have brought up about impeachment, it wasn't really their turn to speak.
So what Schiff was doing when he was gaveling them, it wasn't about what they were saying. Was that a procedural issue? He said, what did he say? The gentlewoman is not recognized. What does that mean? Can he do that?
Right. It's a procedural issue. At that time, at the very beginning of the hearing, it was only for the ranking member, the top Republican, and the chair, a Democrat, to speak along with the witness. So Jordan and Stefanik, who are neither of those two members, were not technically permitted to speak.
Because he gets to decide that, basically, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it's parliamentary procedure.
Okay. Got it. So that brings us to the other sort of unusual thing that seemed to happen during the hearing. While the hearing was going on and the ambassador was answering questions, President Trump tweeted something about her and about the hearing. Can you just walk us through how that happened? Did that show up in the questioning, and how so?
Right. So about an hour into the hearing, as Ambassador Jovanovic was speaking, Trump tweeted saying that she had not been good for the places where she'd previously worked in diplomatic posts. And this was something that cast a big shadow over the hearing. The president had decided to weigh in. And Jovanovic, later in questioning, said that she felt threatened by the president. And some of the Democrats said that this would be potentially considered witness intimidation, which could possibly become another article of impeachment against him.
So, but she was in the hearing, she was answering questions. Did she even see the tweet? How did she even know?
No, so she didn't see the tweet. So this is the modern age that we live in. As the Intelligence Committee chairman brought up the tweets, there are these two big TVs inside the committee room, and they put the tweets up on there, and then the Intelligence Committee chairman read them to the ambassador. This isn't something we've really seen before in this kind of hearing.
So I guess my other point about that was it looked like Trump was actually speaking during the hearing elsewhere. Did he address the tweet, or was he asked any questions about the hearing during that time? Did we see anything about that?
Right. So later in the afternoon, around 2 p.m., he gave a speech and remarks about medical billing and took questions afterwards. And Trump said that it was his right to weigh in on the hearing, and he was not trying to intimidate the witness.
Okay, so that sort of takes care of some of the stuff that seemed a little bit out of the ordinary. Were there any other moments that really stood out to you that weren't sort of standard, performance or posturing, or any that were standard performance or posturing that seemed to be unusual or remarkable?
Well, you still have Republicans trying to debate impeachment on the issues of process or the issues of substance. Some Republicans think that they should attack impeachment based on how it's being done. Others say they should argue it based on the facts of the case.
So speaking of the facts, then, did we learn anything new today? What was covered in any statements by Jovanovic that we maybe hadn't heard before? Because once again, she's testified previously, correct?
Right. So she already gave an interview to congressional members and staff behind closed doors, but none of us had ever seen that before. So this was the very first time we got to see and hear from her in the public eye. And one of the most interesting moments of her testimony was when she talked about how her removal as ambassador at the beginning of April sent a message to what she called shady interests, where corrupt officials in Ukraine had taken advantage of US policy to undermine US efforts to fight corruption. And this was an incredibly dramatic moment. And she talked too about how it felt to be removed as ambassador, which is a level of emotion that we don't necessarily see in a lot of these hearings.
Yeah, that sort of brings up the question of the lines of questioning that we saw from either side of the aisle, correct?
Correct.
What did we see primarily from the Democrats and what did we see primarily from the Republicans? And what does that tell us, if anything, about their strategies in this hearing or perhaps going forward?
So Democrats are really, as we saw on Wednesday, are trying to really stitch together a consistent narrative about what they say happened in Ukraine. That being an abuse of power by the president and a subversion of traditional American diplomatic channels to pursue a shadow campaign to pressure Ukraine to investigate Trump's political enemies. Jovanovich's piece of that puzzle is that she says she was pushed aside, so in part so that this campaign could take place. And Republicans on the other hand are trying to pick apart what exactly Jovanovic knew and when, and are trying to argue that the president is able to remove an ambassador at any time, which is true.
That is true, right? And I just want to take a second because there seems to be some confusion. I want to make sure everybody knows, totally drop your questions in the comments. This is not, we have some background questions that we want to make sure establish a summary of what we saw today, but just to clear that up, definitely drop your questions in the comments and we'll get to them if we can. So that said, we heard people on both sides of the aisle thank her repeatedly for 33 years as a public servant. So what do we know about Jovanovic and her service? And have there been allegations of any kind of sort of shady dealing or anything like that during the course of her career prior to this? What do we know about her?
So as you mentioned, Jovanovic has been in public service for 33 years. Career Foreign Service officer, has been in postings all over the world. And a lot of people thanked her for her service for the State Department because of Trump's attack on her record. But the reason why her record also came up was because she was removed as ambassador following what she called a smear campaign, a disinformation campaign against her in Ukraine that had accused her baselessly of being an anti-Trump official and someone that had worked against American interests.
So what are some of the specific allegations? Because you used the word baselessly. I've heard the word debunked used. What are some of the allegations? What, if any of them, are credible? And if they have been debunked, then by whom?
So earlier this year, there were allegations that came up in conservative media and in opinion columns in the Hill newspaper, where a columnist, John Solomon, said that he had received information from a Ukrainian prosecutor, Lutsenko, who said that Jovanovic had been given a do not prosecute list. Both Jovanovic and other witnesses who have testified, as well as other Ukrainians, have said that this is not true. These are baseless allegations, but they ultimately made Jovanovic's position untenable in Ukraine after conservative figures like Donald Trump Jr. retweeted a lot of these attacks about her.
And this was a statement that was later rescinded, correct? Which is an unusual move for someone who publicly makes an accusation.
Right, exactly.
So how does Giuliani figure into all this? I mean, I think that's sort of the question. Like, we're hearing Lutsenko, we're hearing Yovanovitch. Where does Giuliani come in?
So Giuliani had been part of this whole smear campaign, and two of his associates who actually had been part of this, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, were indicted fairly recently on campaign finance charges. And in addition to helping spread this disinformation campaign against Jovanovic, they were also working with Giuliani to help dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden.
And was there any connection between Jovanovic and Hunter Biden? I mean, their names did come up a little bit in some of the questioning attached to each other. How so?
So she had been asked about it as part of preparations for her confirmation hearings, and that there had been some concerns among Democrats about about Vice President Joe Biden's son in Ukraine. But the overall crux of the case is that Biden's son, the allegations against Biden's son ended up having very little merit. And we actually sent a reporter to Ukraine who interviewed dozens of officials and looked into that very thoroughly.
And then I heard a lot of questions being asked to her about her being prepped to answer questions about Hunter Biden because she was the ambassador at the time. Is that right?
There was one question about that, I believe.
And what was her general takeaway on that?
It had been a question as part of her confirmation hearings, but it hadn't been a kind of slam dunk moment that Republicans wanted, since part of the way Republicans are trying to defend the president is by saying that the allegations of corruption against Hunter Biden were true.
So, if anything, what did we learn today, perhaps other than how Ambassador Jovanovic felt in the losing of her job? Or is that sort of the only new real information?
Well, we learned more about what exactly happened around the circumstances of her firing and what she knew about that. But the thing that might yield more information today is an interview being held as we speak behind closed doors with a State Department official who overheard a key new piece of evidence in the impeachment inquiry, that being a phone call between President Donald Trump and European Union Ambassador Gordon Sondland, where President Trump is said to have asked Sondland about investigations, and Sondland replied that the Ukrainians were ready to undertake them. Something really linking together all of the evidence so far in the impeachment inquiry.
I mean, that sort of brings us to the final question, right? Which is like, what comes next? What should we be watching for? What are you watching for as a politics reporter here in Washington?
So we'll have even more depositions and hearings over the next week. There's another hearing tomorrow, deposition tomorrow, with an official who signed off on many of the documents halting aid to Ukraine. And there are 8 witnesses scheduled to testify publicly next week. And key among them being European Union Ambassador Gordon Sondland, who can really provide us with a lot of firsthand knowledge about what happened so far in the impeachment inquiry and the Ukraine controversy.
All right. Well, we'll be watching for that. I guess that closes out our Friday and our week. And thank you so much, Nick, for helping us get a grasp on the hours of testimony that we've seen again today.
Thanks, Hannah.